Building a More Kind and Just Society panel. And our facilitator today is Tara Warner-Griggs. She's with Race Matters Friends, and she's also the Senior Diversity Assessment and Research Management Consultant at MU. Big, long title.
Yes.
All right, so Tara is a longtime Columbia resident, MU alum and community activist. Her academic background is in public policy and political philosophy. Her work is in assessment and evaluation promoting inclusive organizations and organizational justice. I'm going to read you just a little blurb about what our panel is going to speak about today. Today, the United States is among the richest and most powerful countries in the world. Yet, in contrast to this material affluence, analysis and studies show that the U.S. ranks poorly in terms of the well-being of its citizens. The U.S. has the highest income inequality, exceptionally high levels of infant mortality, mental illness, homicides, imprisonment, as well as lower life expectancy and social mobility. Organizations across this country have been speaking out about cuts to social programs by our current administration, the pulling back of environmental regulations, and the further deterioration of healthcare. We cannot legislate the capacity to feel empathy for the plight of others, but we must give ourselves the chance as a society to understand that the struggle of others is not separate from our own. How is this being done in the world we live in and the world we wish to build?
It's always hard to stick around for the very end of the day. The only thing I would add to the intro is that these disparities that they reference are actually frequently worse here in Boone County than they are throughout the state of Missouri and in other parts of the country. We like to think of Columbia as being this affluent, top 10 places to live kind of place. And it is for some people. In other places, income mobility here is very hard to do. And so I'm super excited to let the members of our panel introduce themselves, and then we'll walk through the talking points and let everybody have a chance to weigh in, and hopefully we'll have a nice, robust discussion. Want to start?
Sure. Hi. I'm Ed Weisbart. I'm a family physician in St. Louis, Missouri, and I chair the Missouri chapter of a group called Physicians for a National Health Program, pnhp.org. And we're a group that advocates and researches and educates around just one key issue, Medicare, how to improve Medicare and how to expand it to everybody in the country. So we're Medicare for All is our niche, and then in Missouri we also fight for Medicaid expansion.
My name is Rose Metro, and I'm on the Teachers Collective of Show Me Dharma, which is a local Buddhist Sangha. And I also teach here at Mizzou in the College of Education, and I'm very involved with the organization Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America as well.
Hey everybody, I'm Ruben. I am a 6-year doctoral candidate finishing up my PhD in psychology. That's one of my identities. I also like to educate. I taught intergroup diversity social justice class. That was my dissertation. And I like to see myself as a soul and a body, because I think that highlights the bigger picture of this experience.
Hey, my name is Charity Goodwin. I'm actually a pastor at the Methodist Church, not too far from here on 9th Street. I'm one of 2 pastors, and some of the work I do here in town is I serve on Missouri Faith Voices, in addition to some personal work around emotional health and facilitate Brene Brown workshops if people are familiar with her work.
Great, thank you guys. So number 1 is economic inequality damages society by exacerbating health and social problems. Addressing economic inequalities in the United States could have the additional benefit of reducing racial, religious, and gender inequalities, because these are generated by similar processes. Can you share an example of a way in which you or your organization is attempting to address this?
I'll talk. So as a church, I can mostly probably speak from my personal experience in my congregation, so as not to lump every congregation. I think as we begin to talk about economic disparity, I think the church sometimes thinks it's doing a good job at providing funds to various groups to support. And while that is good, I think sometimes we have missed out on forming real relationships with people. because I think that's where the real transformation takes place. And so I don't think we do a good job at moving the needle in this particular area where I am, and in previous congregations that I've served, which have been about 5 in my tenure thus far. And I believe the reason is because we heard today to risk community as we formed today a circle in this space. There is a risk that takes courage and vulnerability, right, to form community and be in relationship with other people such that there would be a change and transformation, and I think that's what people really fear. I believe the more stuff we have, the more affluenza one is a part of, the more difficult it is to step in places of uncomfort, such as to level the playing field, if you will.
Anything else?
Addressing economic inequality is sort of a core goal of Medicare for All. Most people can't afford $1,000 or $500 unexpected medical expense, and a major illness, if you don't have good rock solid insurance, can be hundreds of thousands of dollars or more than that. People today that have insurance often has $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 deductibles. I have a $6,000 deductible, so we're all one illness away from having a disaster economically in our lives, which then means you can't work, which then means you lose your job, so you lose your insurance, and you become more vulnerable to this, and it's a disaster. So to me, one of the goals of a Medicare for All solution is actually to solve this problem so that you don't have to be one disease away from bankruptcy. You don't have to worry about losing your house if you get sick. I've seen that way too many times, so I think it's a common interest with this.
I guess I would respond to that by starting to talk about the first 2 precepts of Buddhism, one of which is the principle of non-harm, not harming other living beings, and then the second one is not taking what's not freely given. So sometimes people think of that just as not stealing, but I think it's much broader than that. So we can think about how capitalism involves taking what's not freely given from people, their labor, their health, their energy, and also the harms that are involved in economic inequality to people who are most vulnerable. So that's kind of the philosophical basis of where we're coming from at Show Me Dharma. And I would say 2 ways we've tried to address that are, one, so we do things like loaves and fishes, where a bunch of us go out and serve people who need food. And the other thing, I was just chatting with Ed before the panel started, and he was mentioning that he had been interested in learning to meditate, but that it was really expensive. And I think secular meditation groups and retreats are expensive, but at Show Me Dharma, part of our principles is that the Buddha's teachings are always freely given free of charge on a donation basis, so anyone can come and take an intro meditation class, or anyone can come and be part of our group, and it just depends on you whether you're able to help contribute to our expenses or not. So that's something that's really important to us, is not making Buddhism or meditation be just a tool of the elite to improve their well-being, but to make that accessible to everyone.
So, economic inequality, I'm not about to do this though. So, 2 things come to mind, and so I have some interesting roles, so this fits mostly in my educator role. So when I was teaching, we just sit in that circle activity. I did that the first day of my class, because when you start to see people that you don't know as your brother, your neighbor, you treat them differently, you listen to them differently. So in this class, we set up this space so we could really talk about things that affect us, or don't. From race, class, gender, some classism came up. And what came up is most people don't understand the experience that's not their own. Poor people don't understand the experiences of wealthy people don't understand the experiences of working class poor people, and that creates separation in our society. It's easy to say, I don't care about that person, or they live this life, when you never talk to them or engage them. So just opening up discussion about money. Like it's something we don't talk about, and it's something that's not in the media. And part two with that, you know, we don't blame people for how we're socialized, but we do question it. And what I did was I showed them, there's some video on YouTube, oh, it's deep, but it talks about how mainstream media is co-opted by politicians and by banks, right? I think, 90% of all the media that we receive is owned by 5 companies. And so giving that students that information, they could begin to say, oh, well, this is why we don't talk about the 1% with the money on TV. You know, this is why I didn't know that the wealth distribution was so skewed, because it's not being projected to us, and there's a reason why, right? So giving people more tools, I think, to not only learn about each other, but these structures that are in place that maintain this economic inequality.
I could comment further, if I could.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we know, so we talk about racial inequalities and other inequalities, and we know, for example, that African Americans live 4 to 6 years shorter lives than white Americans do. And it seems like there's a whole range of issues, many of which I have, frankly, inadequate experience, no experience to comment on, so I wouldn't begin to comment on them. But one thing that's not widely recognized is that 90% of that 6-year difference in life expectancy is due to medically treatable conditions. Medically treatable conditions, heart disease, cancer, strokes, things for which we can prevent, we can detect early, we can treat more aggressively. And the kind of treatment that you get for that is determined in part by the kind of insurance that you have. And the kind of insurance that you have is determined in part by your racial background. And so this has actually been looked at closely. And if you look at places where that's not the case, if you look at the VA, for example, African Americans don't just live as long as white Americans in the VA. African Americans have longer life expectancies in the VA. If you look at people on dialysis, you know, if your kidneys stop working, you go on to dialysis, the country has decided that anybody on dialysis should have Medicare, no matter what your background is. So everybody on dialysis gets Medicare the same. And we know African Americans have more need for dialysis because of all the problems. But once they go on to Medicare through dialysis, guess what? African Americans live longer than white Americans on dialysis. I mean, there's a million of these data points that show that if you get rid of the insurance disparities that we have, I can't believe I'm here talking about insurance, but if you get rid of the insurance disparities that we have in the country, it turns out that goes a really long way towards closing the difference in life expectancies that we have. And that's one of the key reasons I think we as a community should come behind the idea of making insurance a background thing that everybody has, and let us get the medical care that we know we all need and deserve. An investment that society makes in addressing the kinds of concerns you're raising would actually, the returns of that would benefit the economics of the same country that did the investing over the next few years. So to me, the way to solve the problems you're mentioning, which are things we've known for decades, is to look at the perverse incentive that's blocking it and change the structure so that there's actually instead a benefit, economic benefit, to fixing it.
I'm wondering how the needed transformations can take effect. I think when you put the matters of people's health in the marketplace, you're going to get the kinds of injustice and disparities that we've been talking about. The same thing's happening in our so-called justice system, where we're warehousing prisoners in for-profit institutions. And we could go on to talk about the huge profits reaped by private enterprise due to the fact that we're a nation in constant warfare. So it goes on, and it's all about the money. So I'm wondering if we could talk about what are ways that we can transform our society and this country into a more just and livable place where all people can feel at home.
It's the very basic reality of listening, knowing people's story, trusting people when they share their story, even if it is completely the opposite of yours. I mean, it sounds so really basic and like, duh, But I think it takes the most courage to, we were in a group today where that's the first thing we did was listen to someone for 2 minutes, and this practice of active listening and being in relationship with someone versus, looking at it based on what you can get from it, and knowing that you will reap some benefit because as we're in community, we have rewards from that. I think we've objectified even being in relationships in some respects with each other. It sounds simple and it sounds like, yeah, but I wholeheartedly believe that from my faith tradition, that when we talk about loving your neighbor, it's really knowing your neighbor, trusting their story, and then as opportunity presents itself to journey with them.
There is actually a new opportunity before us right now that we didn't have 5 years ago, that we have today in the next few months, and that's to fight and organize around the Clean Missouri ballot initiative. So if you don't know about the Clean Missouri ballot initiative yet, come talk to one of us afterwards. But if you do know about it, it's going to be as you know, it's going to be on the general election in November, and it will go a long way towards fixing the campaign, the electoral process that we have in our state. It doesn't do anything federally, but it's a start in our state, and that goes a long way towards stepping forward on what you're talking about.
Can I weigh in on some things? So one of the things, speaking of concrete activities, that I think one of the things that Race Matters Friends is deeply involved with is with the justice system, particularly around policing. But we've also come up with a subcommittee to end cash bail in Columbia, borrowing from arch defenders in St. Louis, and I can't remember the name of the organization's name in New York, kind of modeling our work after them, and so creating a pool of funds, essentially, in the interim while we work on policy changes to end cash bail, which has the same kinds of ripple effects around poverty and exacerbated around race. And that's the interesting thing for me about this first one, is that you can't isolate the income inequality from all of these other dimensions. So we're creating a pool of funds to pay people's bail so they can get out of jail, go back to work, and show up for their court date, right? I mean, we have people who've been sitting in jail for 6 or 7 months on $1,000 bail or a couple $100 bail. So that's time away from families. It's just, again, and weird, perverse incentives, right? We have what is really an archaic system that's highly punitive. That when you actually lay it out for folks, a lot of folks will go, oh, yeah, that doesn't seem right. So it should be something that we can actually fix and would have significant impact, at least locally. I think your question also leads pretty nicely into 2, which is how do you feel activism changes society for the better? And how has your activism impacted your community?
Ruben, you're quiet.
This thing is heavy for me because, and sometimes the way I choose to look at the world, it doesn't disconnect me from the suffering, but it makes watching it happen challenging, because the change is free. Like, obviously, some of these questions that we are talking about have political ramifications, economic ramifications, and money does talk, because if those athletes didn't protest during fall 2015, Jonathan Butler would have been dead. Like, the board of curators said they are not going to be involved with getting Tim Wolf to resign. But the change that I see and I'm so passionate about, and that I'll probably head to the grave talking about and doing, is just love. And I think there's another question that I was kind of synthesizing about being selfish. I think being selfish has been undermined in our society, because I think a lot of us walk around with low self-esteem, and that makes us want to, cling on to material things or to distance ourselves from people who are different than us. But I think when we can begin to really find love within ourselves and figure it out for ourselves, I think that allows us to connect with people we don't know. I think that allows us to have compassion for people we don't know. I think it allows me to see this brother is my brother and I've never seen him in my life, but I have love for him. Like, he doesn't have to do something or have something for me to give him love, for me to care about him. And that is free 99 is what I like to call it, free. So I really struggle with that, but it's a thing that, you know, particularly in activist circles, I think it's so easy to see everything like this. Oh, this is the next issue, this is the next issue. And they're all important, I'm not trying to undermine them, but I think it's important to acknowledge we as beings, and I want to talk about this in my closing, so y'all are already getting a little hors d'oeuvre. We are the activism. Like, you asking that question was activism. You know, as a white guy trying to figure it out, that's big. And we need more models of that. You're modeling that behavior for somebody who doesn't have the courage to come up here and ask that question. So you gotta keep digging inside and say, how am I part of this bigger human community, and what can I do? Like, to be a doctor in today's world and to be advocating for Medicare, like, that puts him in a marginalized group, but he's doing it. Some part of his humanity is speaking to him, and he's listening to it. And I feel that from him. I feel it from all these people. I don't even know these people, but you can tell when people care about that team humanity. They live life in a very different way. So I'd encourage people to tap into that. Not only who are you, but what are you? And I'll talk about that later.
So, tiny fact check, actually 60% of physicians agree with me.
Oh, damn. Well, let's get the other 40%. Let's get the other 40% then.
That was so beautifully spoken, Ruben. Thank you. When I heard you talking, I thought about the Buddhist principle that what unites us is that we all suffer, we all don't want to suffer, and we all experience birth, aging, sickness, and death. Everyone, all living beings. But because of the causes and conditions in our life, we experience those things in really different ways. So someone's experience of sickness with really good health care is going to be very different from a poor person's experience of sickness without that health care. And so I think what we can do is just cultivate that compassion for all beings without exception. And that involves, I think, as Charity was saying earlier, being in the moment with whatever is happening for someone. So if someone is angry, if someone is sad, if someone is hurting, just being there and witnessing that and offering what compassion you can, instead of immediately jumping to second guess or even to fix or even to offer a solution or to say, oh, I know what you mean. I mean, there are so many ways in which we can be there for each other. And I think sometimes people think, oh, like being Buddhist means being calm all the time or like not being angry. And I think that's not true at all. It's just when that anger comes up, seeing it for what it is and seeing it for how it distorts our perceptions and really destroys our health, and doing something with it, you know, showing it to the world. So if people need to block a highway, if they need to occupy the quad, we need to be there for them and witness that and see it. Yeah.
I want to just chime in with that. I had and this was part of my university role. I went to a week-long race intensive with the Social Justice Training Institute. And they do a combination of mixed race and same race caucuses, where you get deep and you have to see each other, because they do that the same kinds of things, right? When you stop and you're like, okay, wait a minute, I'm having a reaction. What's my reaction? Why am I having that reaction? Instead of questioning somebody else's experience. And looking inward to see what it is, things that I didn't realize that I do that are defensive. I'm like, oh, now I see that as defensive. When I do that, I'm like, okay, but it's self-protection, right? It's that unwillingness to be seen and be vulnerable, and not just with people who are different from ourselves. This is what I like to call, lots of people call white people work, since most people in the audience are white, where we sit with each other and unpack the impact of racialized systems on us, and then how we are implicitly working through those at the same time all the time. and not having folks of color have to do our emotional labor for us, but do it with each other. So that it is so liberating. I thought it was going to be so draining that week, and I came home popping. It's liberating. It's terrifying at the beginning, but you come out of it with that sense of, wow, this is what being in a real relationship with even another white person, as a white person, could be like. So what can I do with people who are different from me? It was like, wow, it was amazing. They don't let anybody go to the second one for 2 years. You have to let it, I'm still unpacking, because you see a lot now. I see things that I didn't see before. And so, in some ways, I'm like more insecure and then less insecure. There's a lot of emotional, internal work to be able to be in relationship with people. And so, while I will still go yell at city council, when I feel like I need to go yell at city council, I think the deeper, more meaningful work is that very individual level. Let me see you, let you see me. So.
I want to acknowledge, is it Tara or Tara?
It's Tara.
Tara.
Yes, thank you.
Tara, yeah, I want to acknowledge, like, by show of hands, who believes the journey that she went on to dive into her identity as a white person took some courage? Yeah, so I want to acknowledge that courage because, again, these are things that people avoid for a lifetime, y'all. I do therapy with people, like people let me in their psyche, and you see the mental and emotional gymnastics that people do to avoid that, because that doesn't feel good. Like when I learned that how I was treating women wasn't okay, how I was treating gay people wasn't okay, it hurt. Like I had to really say, Ruben, like, you think you're a good person, but the way you're behaving is not, like that is not healing people. They call that cognitive dissonance in psychology, where you have competing values. And so I had to decide, what am I going to do? Am I going to continue to avoid this? Continue to see and treat women as objects? Or am I going to peel some layers back? And that work is, I hear you, it's tough. You start seeing the world differently. It's like, damn, I have 5 sisters. I won't want any of my 5 sisters to be treated like some of the guys treat women I see, or how I've treated some women. And so doing that work, it's hard, but it takes courage, because once you do it, the reward, there's nothing more rewarding than connecting to someone else. Y'all, we're here to create, to create too, but to connect. And when you can remove those barriers between you and someone else, despite the difference, there is infinite power there. So I just wanted to acknowledge that courage, and I wanted to challenge everybody to be fearless.
And there were 40 other people there with me who were doing that same thing. So, and not just white folks, but it was about half and half. People from all different races, ethnicities, and international backgrounds, all doing that work together. And it's powerful. It's really powerful. It has to be well facilitated. I went and did it. I cannot facilitate that conversation. I did not have those skills in here. Maybe. You know, right? Exactly. You know.
No, I like those spaces because people. Y'all saw what we did this morning.
Yeah.
That was free.
Yeah.
All I did was smile and come in here with some energy, because I could have matched some of the energy of people in here, and that's not what I like to do. I like to bring my own energy, and I'm gonna talk about that at the end. And we just created a circle. And we took some breaths together. And we just made a commitment to be vulnerable. And the way people, I was telling Kate, the way I saw people talking to each other, I could have stopped talking there. Like, because people were connecting. That's all I wanted to do. That was one of my goals I had when I was creating this. Get people to interact. Get people prepared for the learning ahead. And that happened. And we can all do that. Now, can everybody facilitate an in-depth, session, therapeutic-esque, not therapy, but therapeutic-esque? Probably not, but people can push towards that, to empathize, to listen. Like, those are free.
Any questions, comments? Well, I don't think we've heard from everybody on the panel.
No need to repeat.
Any other questions or comments on talking language? Yes, ma'am.
I couldn't hear you.
So I'll repeat it, actually.
What are the disparities in terms of outcomes at the local level? In our local restaurants, in our, local streets?
The Boone Indicators dashboard, write that one down. It's a collaboration amongst the City of Columbia, Boone County, and Heart of Missouri United Way, and a bunch of other nonprofits to put that data up and make it publicly available. And it's pretty good. It's pretty easily accessible. I don't know if the tab is up, but if anybody who wants one can contact me. I can send you a PowerPoint that has all of the disparities in it for Boone County.
And then for policing?
No, this is not for policing. This is done by Steve Hollis, who works for Boone County. He kind of manages a lot of the data stuff for the Boone County the Boone Indicators dashboard. But I think the tab is up too on the website. I think there's a tab that says disparities, and so all of those are in one place. I'm not sure if they're done building it yet, so it might not be live. Data at MU. We're working on that. I mean, I know what some of them are, and they're publicly available. So for example, if you're an African-American student at MU, started MU as a first-time college student, I think over the last 3 years, it was around 54% graduate within 6 years with a bachelor's degree.
Not that they're white students.
Right. Try 68%.
And
So
then-
a big gap. And if you break that down by gender, African American males, there's an even bigger disparity. And folks even on campus don't know. So that's the big driver for me on campus. This
Well,
is
we
my
can also
favorite
look at those
thing to
data
take
in other ways, like
Yeah.
looking at economic differences
Yeah.
between those groups and the extent to which that.
Yeah, and so for students who are Pell eligible, who are eligible for financial aid, that disparity is about the same as for African Americans.
Can I ask a follow-up question real quick? Unless somebody has a dire response.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to take it somewhere else. This is like really like curious. Data. Should I ask this question? If I ask this question and it's offensive, let me know. But it's like, tell me what purpose the data serves for you. Like what is that fulfilling for you? Having data.
For me?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to argue. I think
No, it's not no argument. I'm just curious.
Well, I think that sometimes, like you were saying, with the media earlier, that we don't get the full picture of what disparities look like.
Yeah.
And so, I think in some areas we've gotten better at it, but there's sort of this hiding. And so if you look at like the research on what white Americans think versus what black Americans think, it's like there are a lot of white Americans who think that race is not a problem anymore.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think when you look at some of the disparities that actually exist out there in terms of outcomes, you follow me?
Yeah.
So black students who are coming to MU, white students who are coming to MU, those I think are good data, and try to figure out exactly then what moves those numbers. You know what I mean? Because I guess we spend a lot of time thinking about what's going on in our heads, and I think that's good, and I think that's the root of some of the problems. But I think, what the kinds of things that Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement was really focusing on was to say, let's take care of the real disparities out there, and maybe that will move some of what's in our head. I don't know.
No, thank you for sharing that. So real quick, 2 points, and I want to hear from some of the other panelists who know more than me. I think that 2 thoughts come to my mind. On one hand, I hear what you're saying. Like, we need data-based decision-making, because if we were making data-based decisions, our prisons would look different, our legal system would look different, our universities would look different, our whole world, our country would look different, our world would look different, right? So on one hand, I want to acknowledge that. On another hand, because this is something I've dealt with as a PhD student in a research-intensive environment, how many times do you have to study poverty to decide you got to give somebody some resources? How many times do you have to make demands? Do you know the demands that we submitted in 2015? Abby, where did they come from?
We just came up with, first of all, LBC
From when? From back when?
in the 70s.
So the template was already there. We already know these problems were there. I remember building up to the protest. There was a climate study that was done a few years ago, and they wrote down all the problems already. The committee was formed, the recommendations were made, the data was there. What do you have? nothing, nobody wants to do anything with the data. So it's important that we connect that data to our hearts. That's why I'm bringing up this psychological piece, because it's easy to intellectualize it. Oh, this isn't significant enough, or these numbers are increasing. But no, connect it. If that was your son, or if that was somebody in your family who wasn't graduating, how would you feel? If it was your kid who has a mental illness, who can't get services, how would you feel? You see, it's a nuanced difference. So you're right. I think we got to acknowledge that, and I don't think we can stop with just data.
Yeah, I think, as an educational researcher, we need qualitative data, we need the stories, and we need quantitative data. Because different things are going to reach different people. And I deal with this in the gun legislation movement as well. Some people are moved by the fact that, Missouri has a greater number of toddlers who shoot themselves unintentionally every year than any other state often. And some people are moved by hearing the one story of that mom who's like, I never thought he would get the gun, And I think, I've heard stories for so long about disparities in the way kids of different races are disciplined in the school system. And it happened, actually, I think Tara posted this on Facebook. The Office of Civil Rights had this pie chart for Columbia Public Schools, our local public school system. And after hearing these stories again and again, it was actually seeing that pie chart where we have 12% African American kids, and they're getting 50% of the in-school suspensions, and that is certainly underreported. For me, I was like, I've got to do something about this. But then it's reinforced by hearing that story from my friends who posted on Twitter, and it's public. So Adrienne Clifton posted that her son's first day of 7th grade, this black boy goes into his classroom and his teacher says to him, I think you have a bad attitude, and I'm going to talk to you about that bad attitude. Imagine that's your kid's first day of middle school. 6th grade it was. And so I think different things are going to touch different people and kind of rip their hearts open. And that is what makes the space for someone to then take action.
We can talk about this more offline, but I think the issue of becoming vulnerable, because I agree, I'm the least assessment type person you'll ever meet who does this work. Because I actually more training in qualitative research. But the need for institutions to become vulnerable, right? To be able to be willing to look at what's real here. And then the structural incentives that are set up, the data that's important, or the things that get looked at are based on the incentives that are set up for behavior. And so they're all intertwined, right? So I know we're on time, right? We're out of time.
A few minutes.
Okay, good. So we can keep talking about this issue, or we want to move on to the next one so we can get through a few more of the talking points. So I like this one, it actually goes along. So number 3 is the ancient Greeks viewed being kind as rational, emphasizing the positive effects of kindness on societies. If a just society requires a strong sense of community, it must find a way to cultivate in citizens a dedication to the common good. How do we work to develop this sense of common good?
I would like to say that I think we actually have a much stronger common sense of the common good than is obvious by watching the fragmented television and other media that we have access to. And I say that because although I love speaking with liberal groups and progressive groups, I feel like I'm at home in my family, I actually don't try to do that very often. Instead, I spend most of my time trying to talk about my issue, Medicare for All, with the most conservative groups that I can get my hands on. The most conservative groups I can get my hands on. And I don't know if it's appropriate to characterize it this way, but I spend more of my time traveling around into rural parts of our state and going to community clubs like Rotaries or American Legions or Kiwanis clubs. I did one 3 days ago, I've got 2 next week. I mean, that's how I spend my time. And they all start the same with this attitude of, all right, we you have to have a speaker, and some idiot brought this bozo from St. Louis in. And 20 minutes later, we're arguing about why it's taking so long to accomplish these social changes. 20 minutes later. And the reason is, I think the reason is that we have far more in common in terms of the common good and recognition and appreciation for it than we ever give ourselves credit for, and we've let ourselves slip into language that so annoys the people with whom we have some disagreements with. In my world, in the Medicare for All world, you notice I'm using the phrase Medicare for All, and I'm not using the phrase single payer. Nobody knows what a payer is. So you say the same phrase single payer, and liberals go, yeah, that's what I'm supposed to like. And conservatives go, communist. So you've not advanced the dialogue. But if you say the phrase Medicare for All, most people go, well, my mother has, I have Medicare, well, my kids, and they immediately, you don't have all that baggage, and you can talk about, well, what do the economics look like? And actually talk about the economics without the pejorative baggage. So what was the phrase I heard on the radio? I'm stubbornly optimistic that we have, Kofi Annan said that he's stubbornly optimistic. And we have this common good sense that we're letting ourselves not talk about or recognize, but it is just, I believe it's right there, ready to be scraped away and re-energized.